Climate issues aren't just concerns for governments and businesses. They affect every one of us both now and in the future. Let's look at how to avoid a climate disaster from Bill Gates' perspective. As many know, Bill Gates is a co-founder of Microsoft and the initiator of Breakthrough Energy, an alliance focused on commercializing climate-related technologies. In this book, Gates sets a goal of achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions. He examines key carbon-emitting sectors like energy, manufacturing, agriculture, and transportation, analyzing current challenges, available technologies, and the breakthroughs still needed. He concludes with a concrete action plan for governments, businesses, and individuals alike. In this video, you'll gain an understanding of how climate change impacts humanity, insight into new energy-saving and emission-reducing technologies across 5 major sectors, 6 habits to make your lifestyle more eco-friendly, practical steps to help protect our planet. Hello everyone, and welcome to BookSpark. This channel is all about sharing highlights from impactful books. We cover at least 3 new books every week, so don't forget to subscribe. We've organized the full script into a downloadable document, which you can access via the link below. Now let's dive into today's book. We're going to discuss Bill Gates' new book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. This book is incredibly important because many countries and regions have now pledged to achieve carbon neutrality by the mid-21st century. This means that by around 2050, the total amount of carbon dioxide emissions will be offset by the amount absorbed through natural or technological methods. This is one of the world's most widely shared long-term goals. Once, I had dinner with 2 very famous entrepreneurs from China, and they asked me if I could find a book that clearly explains what carbon neutrality is all about, the current situation, new technologies, and the challenges we face. Later, I came across this book. I discovered that Bill Gates has been following and researching this issue for a long time, and he really has access to a lot of first-hand information and technology. First, we need to know one important number: 51 billion tons per year. Currently, we emit 51 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent into the atmosphere each year. Carbon dioxide equivalent is a unit used to compare the emissions of different greenhouse gases by converting them into the amount of CO2 that would have the same global warming potential. Rather than using the term greenhouse gases all the time, we often refer to it simply as carbon. But this includes methane, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and more. What are greenhouse gases? Earth's greenhouse gases make life possible for humans. Without them, the temperature difference between day and night would be unimaginably extreme, much like on the moon, where we would quickly freeze or overheat. Molecules made of 2 identical atoms like oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen do not contribute to the greenhouse effect. Heat and light pass easily through these molecules. However, when you have molecules made of 2 different atoms, like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, or methane, the heat passing through them causes the molecules to vibrate, trapping the heat. Greenhouse gases essentially act as a thermostat for the Earth, moderating temperature differences between summer and winter, and between day and night, allowing us to survive. However, as greenhouse gases increase, problems begin to emerge. While carbon dioxide is the main greenhouse gas, others like methane, nitrous oxide, and even water vapor contribute as well. For example, when you're in a steamy bathroom, the temperature stays warm because water vapor, being a greenhouse gas composed of 2 different atoms, helps retain heat. What's the issue with the rise in Earth's temperature caused by greenhouse gases? Before the 18th century, the planet was in balance because there wasn't an industrial revolution yet, and people used very little fossil fuel. In the past, our ancestors burned wood for cooking and used water wheels, but the carbon emissions they produced were balanced by the amount of CO2 absorbed by the Earth's vegetation each year. Since the Industrial Revolution, however, greenhouse gas emissions have increased dramatically, causing global temperatures to rise. We often hear about how without intervention, the Earth's temperature could rise by a few degrees. Many people don't realize the significance of a 1 or 2 degree increase in average global temperature. What makes it so dangerous? Just consider that during the last ice age, when the world was mostly frozen, the average global temperature was only 6 degrees cooler than it is today. One of the immediate consequences of global warming is rising sea levels. If you visit the Arctic today, you won't find the snowy landscape you might imagine, but more land, grass, and meadows emerging. You've probably seen pictures of polar bears stranded on melting ice. The ice is shrinking, leaving these animals with no place to go. Global warming causes rising sea levels, submerging land, and triggering extreme weather events like Hurricane Katrina. Why are we seeing more severe hurricanes lately? This is a result of climate change. Extreme weather creates scenarios where the poor become poorer and the rich become richer. Regions that need water face prolonged droughts, while places plagued by floods hardly ever see a dry day. This is what extreme weather brings. In addition, scorching heat waves will become more frequent, disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable people. Ironically, those who suffer the most from climate change tend to be the people who contribute the least to carbon emissions. The countries emitting the most carbon are developed nations like the US and European countries. The richest 16% of the population produces 40% of global carbon emissions. That's why developed countries bear greater responsibility for worsening climate conditions. Their cars, buildings, and lifestyles consume immense energy. Meanwhile, in places like India or sub-Saharan Africa, where many don't even have access to electricity, carbon emissions are extremely low. Yet, these are the people most affected by rising temperatures because they lack the resources to protect themselves. For us, we can turn on air conditioning to shield ourselves from the heat, though this ironically contributes to higher carbon emissions, making the planet even warmer. But those living on the streets have no such protection. As temperatures rise, we'll see more frequent volcanic eruptions, wildfires, and the extinction of species as their habitats shrink. The book also highlights the impact on China. If global temperatures continue to rise, the biggest issue China will face is extreme drought. So if we don't control carbon emissions, there will be mass casualties by the end of the century. This is why we must bring carbon emissions down to zero. If the world doesn't commit to this zero target, we will be unable to prevent Earth's temperatures from spiraling out of control. What are the challenges we face? The difficulties are substantial, starting with our overdependence on fossil fuels. By 2060, the world's building stock is expected to double. This was a shocking revelation to me. It seems like the world is already filled with buildings, but apparently by 2060, global building stock will have doubled. Many places will be developed, meaning that for the next 40 years, we will essentially be adding the equivalent of a new city the size of New York every month. Another major challenge is that the pace of technological change is not as fast as it is in the IT sector. I once talked about a rather optimistic book by Rifkin called The Zero Marginal Cost Society. In that book, he suggested that the development of solar energy would follow Moore's Law. Moore's Law applies to chips. Every certain period of time, the chip's size halves and its efficiency doubles. Moore's Law has held true for many years and has driven technological advances. So, there was hope that high-tech innovations, like solar photovoltaics, would evolve as rapidly as chips. But in reality, while solar energy technology has made significant progress, it can't match the pace of IT advancements. That's the first issue. It's not advancing exponentially like Moore's Law. The second issue is outdated laws. Many air quality regulations were established in the 1970s, long before the concept of greenhouse gases was understood. So many of these laws are out of sync with today's needs. Third, there is a lack of basic global consensus. One of the most striking examples of this was when former US President Trump withdrew from the Paris Agreement. Fortunately, after Biden took office, he immediately rejoined. The Paris Agreement is where countries around the world come together to discuss how to slow the rate of global warming and achieve peak carbon emissions and carbon neutrality globally. These are just some of the massive challenges we face today. Think about how reliant we are on carbon. Just sitting here in this studio, using electricity, the materials used to make the equipment around us, like steel and plastic, all of it is connected to the consumption of fossil fuels because we need them for power generation. The book features a chart on carbon emissions that reveals some surprising statistics. Many people don't fully understand where most of our carbon emissions come from. When asked, most would probably think of car exhaust, assuming it's a major contributor. But vehicle emissions are far from the largest source. The chart shows the following breakdown of greenhouse gas emissions from human activities. The number one contributor, accounting for 31%, is production and manufacturing, including cement, steel, and plastic. This is without even considering power generation. Just the production of these three typical materials accounts for this large share. It's one of the biggest global challenges. The second largest contributor at 27% is electricity generation and storage. However, the good news is that if we can change how we generate electricity, it will also impact production and manufacturing. That's why transforming the electricity sector is absolutely critical. Third is agriculture and livestock farming, which might come as a surprise to many. This includes both plant and animal farming. The biggest culprit here is cattle, because of how their digestive systems work. Cows emit large amounts of methane through belching and flatulence. In the book, Bill Gates mentions that his family advised him not to keep using the word flatulence because it sounds crude, especially when speaking at international conferences, but Gates said there's really no other way to describe it. The methane produced by cows' burps and farts is a significant contributor to the greenhouse effect, accounting for 19% of emissions. Fourth is transportation, which includes airplanes, trucks, ships, and personal vehicles. All forms of transportation combined contribute 16%. Finally, the smallest portion is urban living, which includes heating and cooling our homes. Combined, heating and air conditioning account for about 7%. Together, these five categories contribute to the 51 billion tons of carbon emissions produced each year. Our goal now is to gradually reduce this number to zero. So, where is the hope? Bill Gates is quite optimistic. He believes it can be done. Let's start by looking at electricity, because electricity is the most central lever in this challenge. It accounts for 27% of carbon emissions. And as a core factor, changing how we produce electricity will have ripple effects, including on transportation. There's a measure used to quantify electricity production called a gigawatt, where 1 gigawatt equals 1 billion watts. Global electricity consumption is so vast that we use astronomical numbers. The world's total electricity usage is around 5,000 gigawatts annually, with the US alone accounting for 1,000 gigawatts, or about 20% of global consumption. New York consumes 12 gigawatts, but it's not the highest. Tokyo uses 23 gigawatts, and during summer peaks, it can hit 50 gigawatts. When I visited Japan, especially Tokyo, I noticed that most office workers wore suits, ties, and leather shoes, regardless of the season, even though it's quite hot in the summer. So, they crank up the air conditioning in the office, making it freezing cold inside. And at night, many buildings don't turn off the lights, staying brightly lit, which looks beautiful but causes massive electricity usage, similar to what we see in New York. These practices contribute to peak electricity demand. We've all heard of nuclear, hydro, wind, and solar power, but different energy sources require varying amounts of land or water. When you measure the amount of power produced per square meter, you realize that replacing fossil fuels with clean energy isn't so simple. Coal, oil, and natural gas, collectively known as fossil fuels, produce between 500 to 10,000 watts per square meter, which is the highest output. Nuclear power generates 500 to 1,000 watts per square meter, which is also quite efficient. Solar power produces 5 to 20 watts per square meter. Hydropower generates 5 to 50 watts per square meter, while wind power only produces 1 to 2 watts per square meter. You've likely seen wind turbines on mountains, plains, and offshore. They take up a lot of space, but generate relatively little energy. Finally, biomass and other forms of energy from wood produce around 1 watt per square meter. This highlights one of the main reasons fossil fuels are so difficult to replace. The only energy source that comes close to competing is nuclear power, but we're still pushing forward with solar, wind, and other alternatives. Some people have turned to green fuels, fuels made from plants rather than oil extracted from the ground. For example, Bill Gates mentions that his private jet runs on green fuel, which has much lower carbon emissions. However, these technologies come with what's known as a green premium, meaning the cost of plant-based fuel is significantly higher than fossil fuels. The extra cost is what we call the green premium. When considering whether we can switch from one energy source to another, it's crucial to calculate the costs. Is anyone willing to pay the green premium? For example, if you switch your home's electricity to solar power, will you end up saving money or spending more? Many people assume they'll save money because once the solar panels are installed, the electricity is free. But the panels and batteries cost money, and when they break, replacing them will cost money too. So, are you willing to bear these costs? Bill Gates highlights the cost of green aviation fuel. While regular jet fuel costs $2.20 per gallon, green aviation fuel is priced at $5.35 per gallon, more than double. So if you want to power your plane with green fuel, you'll need to pay more than twice as much. Currently, there are around 860 million people worldwide who still lack reliable access to electricity, so we cannot afford to reduce electricity consumption, as there are still many areas that require a substantial increase in power supply. Now, what does the global energy mix look like in terms of electricity generation? Here's a breakdown. Coal accounts for 36% of global electricity, natural gas 23%, both of which are high-carbon fossil fuels. Hydropower provides 16%, nuclear energy 10%, renewable energy 11%, oil 3%, and other sources make up 1%. Clearly, the challenge ahead is significant. Let's analyze the pros and cons of different power generation methods. Many people are interested in solar and wind power, which are seen as the most environmentally friendly options. The biggest issue with solar and wind energy, however, is intermittency. When the wind is strong, there's more power than needed, and when it's calm, there's no power. Therefore, regions relying on wind and solar energy must remain connected to the power grid. For example, Germany has aggressively promoted solar energy, offering many subsidies. As a result, if you visit Germany, you'll notice solar panels installed on many rooftops. The government's efforts have allowed many areas to use solar-generated electricity. However, a study conducted in June and December 2018 revealed that Germany's solar power output in June was 10 times greater than in December, due to the lower amount of sunlight in the winter. This disparity caused a significant strain on the grid. Additionally, Germany exports its surplus electricity to other European countries, but this caused protests from neighboring nations who complained about the burden on their power lines, which could lead to equipment damage due to fluctuating supply levels. Thus, wind and solar power need better battery storage solutions to store excess electricity. However, battery costs remain high, presenting a significant technical challenge for these energy sources. Research is currently focused on how to reduce battery costs and increase storage capacity, which are cutting-edge issues in the field today. When it comes to nuclear energy, France leads the way, generating 70% of its electricity from nuclear power, compared to only 20% in the US. The public's biggest concern about nuclear energy is the potential for disasters like those at Fukushima or Chernobyl, involving nuclear leaks and radiation. But let's consider some statistics that may change our perspective. The book includes a table showing the number of deaths per terawatt-hour of energy produced from different sources. Coal tops the list, causing 24.6 deaths per terawatt-hour due to its dangerous nature. Oil comes in second, with 18.4 deaths per terawatt-hour, as extracting, transporting, and burning oil all carry significant risks. Biomass energy causes 4.6 deaths per terawatt-hour, and natural gas 2.8 deaths per terawatt-hour, which is a significant reduction. Surprisingly, nuclear energy causes just 0.07 deaths per terawatt-hour, making it the least deadly energy source according to current data. There is also geothermal energy, which can be used for electricity generation. However, the issue with geothermal energy is its low energy density, meaning it cannot supply power to large areas. In terms of electricity storage, beyond batteries, researchers are exploring other innovative technologies. For instance, Germany sometimes has excess electricity in June due to abundant solar power. One method for storing this energy is pumped hydro storage, using surplus electricity to pump water uphill and then letting it flow back down to generate power during low sunlight periods like December. This technology is already being implemented. Some have even suggested storing large stones instead of water, using electricity to lift them uphill and releasing them during off-peak seasons. The imagination of researchers knows no bounds. Another method is thermal energy storage, where electricity is converted into heat and then back into electricity when needed. One promising technology on the horizon is hydrogen storage. Excess electricity can be used to produce cheap hydrogen, which can then be stored and later burned to generate electricity when needed. These are just some of the approaches being tested for energy storage. With the large-scale development of solar and wind energy, which can lead to significant power waste during peak production, effective energy storage is crucial. Bill Gates also discusses another power-related innovation, carbon capture. This technology offers potential but faces significant challenges. What is carbon capture? It involves adding high-tech devices to power plants, which still burn oil or coal, to capture carbon dioxide from the exhaust and store it instead of releasing it into the atmosphere. Carbon capture technology is not yet highly efficient and is currently very expensive. Installing carbon capture equipment at a power plant requires a significant investment, which many plants find economically unfeasible. This cost would likely be passed on to consumers in the form of a green premium, meaning electricity generated with carbon capture would be more expensive. Additionally, implementing energy-saving measures is critical. For example, during peak electricity demand in the daytime, your washing machine could be set to run automatically at 2 a.m., helping avoid peak demand. In this case, the government could offer you a lower electricity rate. By using electricity during off-peak hours, you could reduce your bill. This is called off-peak electricity usage, and it's an essential topic in energy conservation. So while Bill Gates doesn't explicitly say it, my takeaway from the book is that nuclear power might be a key part of the solution. Next, let's talk about production and manufacturing, which accounts for 31% of emissions. First, how do you turn iron into steel? Steel is made by adding carbon to iron, and the amount of carbon added determines the grade of steel. However, this process also produces carbon emissions, which are released into the atmosphere. Steel has a history spanning 4,000 years, and by 2050, humanity will need to produce about 2.8 billion tons of crude steel. Since we'll need to build many cities and structures, steel will be in high demand. However, producing this 2.8 billion tons of steel will release 5 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Cement production is expected to release around 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide by 2050, roughly the same amount as today. As for plastic, it takes a long time to degrade, so its carbon emissions are relatively low. Bill Gates points out that to calculate the green premium for materials, we first need to understand where greenhouse gas emissions come from in the manufacturing process. He breaks it down into 3 stages. 1. Energy to power factories, using fossil fuels to generate electricity for factory operations. If we can solve the power generation issue, this first step is addressed. 2. Energy for heat, using fossil fuels to generate heat for various manufacturing processes, such as melting iron ore for steel production. 3. Material production, the actual manufacturing of materials, which in some cases, like cement production, inevitably releases carbon dioxide. Each of these materials, steel, cement, and plastic, undergoes these 3 stages. So, how can we reduce carbon emissions? Here are the main strategies. 1. Injecting recycled CO2 into cement. Cement contains carbon, and during production, CO2 is released. By capturing and re-injecting this carbon dioxide into the cement, we can currently reduce emissions by about 10%, which is already impressive. Researchers are working to reduce emissions by up to 33%, meaning 1/3 of the CO2 emissions from cement production could be cut through this technology. 2. Using seawater and captured CO2 to produce cement. Carbon capture technology from power plants can be utilized, injecting the captured CO2 into cement production. 3. Electrifying steel production. Steel production currently relies on fossil fuels. If we could switch to electric steelmaking, and that electricity comes from cleaner, low-emission sources, we could significantly reduce emissions in the steel industry. Another promising development is the potential for plastics to become carbon sinks. What does that mean? For example, when you plant trees, you are rewarded with carbon credits, which you can then use to offset your carbon footprint, such as allowing you to produce more emissions elsewhere. Countries are now engaging in carbon credit trading. I recently met an entrepreneur who founded a company specializing in geothermal heat pumps. For each geothermal heat pump they install, the government grants them carbon credits because they are replacing traditional high-emission boilers with this more sustainable technology. So, why might plastics become carbon sinks? There's a technology behind it. If we can extract carbon from the air or obtain carbon from plants, a process several companies are working on, plastics could become carbon sinks. We'd need a zero-carbon heat source, which could be clean electricity, hydrogen, or natural gas with carbon capture systems. Producing plastics using such methods would result in carbon credits. If plastics replace other materials and reduce overall emissions, they could contribute positively to the environment. For instance, using geothermal heat pumps instead of traditional boilers for heating earns carbon credits because it reduces carbon emissions. In the future, plastic could become an environmentally friendly material if the production process is made more efficient and sustainable. By using renewable electricity and raw materials, plastics could actually help reduce carbon emissions. That's the second major area, production and manufacturing. The third area involves agriculture and livestock. Leaving nutrition aside, why is eating plants more eco-friendly than eating animals? It boils down to energy conversion efficiency. For instance, to get 1 calorie of energy from chicken, the chicken needs to consume 2 calories of feed, a 1:2 ratio. For pigs, it's a 1:3 ratio, meaning 3 calories of feed are required to produce 1 calorie of pork. Beef has the worst ratio, 1:6, meaning cows need to consume 6 calories of feed to produce 1 calorie of beef. Moreover, cows produce large amounts of methane, a potent greenhouse gas, through their digestive processes, including burping and flatulence. This methane contributes significantly to global warming. So, what can we do? Some people have advocated for a global ban on beef consumption. Bill Gates points out that this is unlikely to happen, especially in countries like France, where eating steak is deeply ingrained in the culture. While it's great if individuals choose to reduce beef consumption, you can't expect everyone to give it up entirely. One solution is genetic improvement. For instance, African cattle produce more methane than Asian cattle. If we can breed cattle that emit less methane through burping and flatulence, we could reduce their environmental impact. This is a slower solution, but it's one approach. Another approach is plant-based meat substitutes. These are made from plants but are designed to mimic the taste and texture of meat. Plant-based burgers, for example, taste almost like traditional ground beef, but they're about 86% more expensive than regular burgers. The most expensive option, however, is lab-grown meat. Unlike plant-based meat, lab-grown meat is made from real animal cells cultivated in a lab. A few years ago, a lab-grown burger cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, but scientific advancements could drive prices down significantly, much like the way gene testing has become much more affordable over time. So lab-grown burgers may become cheaper in the future. However, lab-grown meat faces legal and regulatory challenges. Since it's grown in a lab rather than coming from an actual cow, there are questions about how to classify it and whether it's considered safe for consumption. These are issues that need to be addressed as the technology advances. Another important aspect is reducing food waste. Many of us think that leftover food is harmless, as it decomposes naturally in the soil or gets eaten by animals. However, the greenhouse effect we are discussing today is different from the plastic pollution we've known in the past. As leftover food decomposes, it undergoes chemical reactions that release carbon dioxide. Whether it's composting food waste, feeding it to pigs, or simply letting it decompose in the soil, it still results in CO2 emissions. Every year, food waste generates 3.3 billion tons of carbon dioxide. Considering that we need to reduce 51 billion tons of CO2 overall, this one issue alone accounts for 3.3 billion tons. Meanwhile, many people in the world still suffer from hunger. Then there's the issue of fertilizer. Fertilizers have undoubtedly been incredibly beneficial to humanity. Without them, agriculture wouldn't be able to sustain the global population. But when fertilizers are applied to soil, they contribute to increased carbon emissions. Deforestation is another major factor contributing to CO2 emissions because forests absorb carbon through photosynthesis. However, to make more space for cattle ranching and crop farming, people have been cutting down forests, which reduces the planet's carbon absorption capacity. Some people suggest that planting more trees could offset these emissions. But Bill Gates did the math to show how costly and impractical this solution is. To offset the lifetime greenhouse gas emissions of an average American, it would take planting about 50 acres of trees in tropical regions. Multiply that by the US population, and you'd need 16 billion acres of trees, equivalent to 25 million square miles, or half of the world's land area. In other words, just to offset the carbon emissions of the US population, you'd have to cover more than half the planet in newly planted trees. While reforestation is important, it's not a complete solution. The real, long-term answer lies in breakthroughs in science and technology, like carbon capture, carbon recycling, and battery storage. These advancements will be much more efficient than planting trees to absorb carbon emissions. This covers the 19% of emissions coming from agriculture and livestock. Next, let's talk about transportation, which accounts for about 16% of total carbon emissions. First, it's important to know that in most parts of the world, gasoline is cheaper than water. Bottled water and soft drinks often cost more than gasoline. While manufacturing and production generate the largest share of global carbon emissions, the sources vary by region. In the US, transportation is the leading cause of emissions. Let's look at the breakdown of emissions from different modes of transportation. Passenger cars, SUVs, and motorcycles, vehicles we commonly use, account for 47% due to their sheer number. Garbage trucks, buses, and 18-wheeler trucks used for work and transport contribute 30%. Ships and cruise liners make up 10%. Airplanes also account for 10%, with emissions from aviation and shipping being roughly equal. The remaining 3% comes from other sources. So one of the biggest responsibilities for individuals is to manage their personal vehicles. The solution is fairly clear: electric vehicles, EVs. The key issue with EVs, however, is the source of electricity. While EVs don't produce emissions while driving, the batteries and the electricity used to charge them can still cause emissions. So, while using EVs is a step in the right direction, we also need to address where that electricity comes from. Bill Gates notes that China is moving fast in this area. Shenzhen has fully electrified its bus fleet, and many of Beijing's buses are also electric. However, batteries aren't suitable for heavy-duty trucks because of the immense power required to move such loads. Warren Buffett once asked Bill Gates why airplanes couldn't use batteries. The problem is that current battery technology is insufficient for large planes. Electric planes that exist today can only carry about 2 people because they need to be lightweight. Commercial planes, on the other hand, would need batteries that are 36 times heavier than current fuel tanks, which makes battery-powered flight impractical. Similarly, heavy trucks and airplanes require far more energy than batteries can currently provide. What we can do, though, is reduce transportation in general. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us the potential of remote work, where people realize that many meetings and tasks can be done without face-to-face interaction. By holding more virtual meetings, we can cut down on travel and reduce carbon emissions. We can also focus on using alternative materials in production. For example, using more eco-friendly materials to manufacture cars and trucks can make a difference. Improving fuel efficiency is another key strategy. While we may still be using fossil fuels for now, improving engine efficiency can help reduce emissions and make our fuel usage more effective. Finally, the use of electric vehicles and alternative fuels is a clear path forward. If, in the future, 70 to 80% of our electricity comes from nuclear or solar power, driving an electric vehicle will become even more environmentally friendly. That covers the transportation sector. The last area to address is heating and cooling, which accounts for about 7% of global emissions. There are currently 1.6 billion air conditioning units in use worldwide, and many people still don't have access to air conditioning. India and China in particular are seeing a surge in air conditioner sales due to urbanization and modernization efforts. Bill Gates emphasizes that we can't deny people in countries like India access to air conditioning, especially since it can be a matter of life and death during heat waves. Even with air conditioning, their carbon emissions will still be much lower than those of the average American. Air conditioning can literally save lives. However, using air conditioners makes the outdoors hotter. If you've ever taken a walk in a neighborhood during the summer, you've probably felt the hot air blowing from everyone's air conditioning units. This raises the outdoor temperature, creating what's known as the urban heat island effect. Cities are typically hotter than rural areas because of the high population density, increased carbon emissions, and the heat released by air conditioners and other appliances. One technology that deserves attention is the ground source heat pump. The principle behind air conditioning is to use energy differentials to raise or lower temperatures, and ground source heat pumps work in a similar way. The energy difference below the ground can facilitate temperature exchanges. If you were to replace your heating or cooling systems with ground source heat pumps, you could already save 20% on your energy bills. It's cost-effective right now. So why aren't more people adopting this technology? There are several reasons, including legal hurdles. Governments aren't actively promoting this solution, and many people renting homes have no incentive to make such an upgrade. Additionally, some people might feel they can't afford the upfront investment as they're already struggling with their finances. They think it's not worth the cost. But in reality, if this is your home and you plan to stay for a long time, or if you can negotiate with your landlord to implement such technology, you can significantly lower your carbon footprint. Another innovation is smart buildings. Back in 2008, I visited Germany to film a program on architecture and saw these kinds of smart buildings. The building had solar panels all over its roof and a system that collected every drop of rainwater. What amazed me was that the heat generated from activities like cooking was converted into electricity and stored in batteries before being released outside. When external heat tried to enter the house, it was similarly converted into electricity and stored, and then cool air was circulated inside. I was blown away. It was so advanced. That building was energy negative, producing more energy than it consumed and sending excess power back to the grid. In Seattle, there's a place called the Bullitt Center, which Bill Gates considers to be an incredibly energy-efficient building. Sometimes it generates 60% more energy than it consumes, which is even more advanced than the building I saw in 2008. This building features an ultra-tight envelope design that minimizes energy leakage. It limits air exchange between the indoors and outdoors and uses high-quality insulation materials, triple-glazed windows, and energy-efficient doors. I'm particularly interested in windows equipped with smart glass, which automatically adjusts its tint based on room temperature, darkening when the room is too warm and brightening when it's too cool. New building codes are helping promote these energy-saving concepts, which can expand the market for related products and reduce their costs. This allows us to build many more energy-efficient buildings. I recently saw a project focused on double-glazed windows. If we want to build energy-efficient structures in the future, we'll need to innovate with glass. Double-glazed windows insulate heat, and if you vacuum seal the space between the two panes, their energy efficiency will be significantly improved. Currently, the process of vacuum sealing such glass takes hours, but I've seen a technology that can vacuum seal an entire pane of double-glazed glass in just 15 minutes. This is the kind of energy-saving and environmentally friendly innovation we need to be paying attention to. So there's definitely potential to reduce that 7% of emissions related to heating and cooling. Overall, electricity is the key. If we can fully address power generation, the other sectors will naturally follow, because industries like cement and steel production also rely on electricity. Add in carbon capture and battery storage technologies, and achieving carbon peaking and neutrality becomes feasible. In addition to these carbon reduction technologies, we also need to consider how to adapt to a warming world. Even a 0.5 degree or 1 degree increase in global temperatures will have a significant impact. So what can we do? Bill Gates emphasizes that we need to help farmers cope with increasingly extreme weather conditions and risks. During their visits to Africa and South America, his team found that life is becoming more challenging for farmers because the weather is becoming unpredictable. Governments, charitable organizations, and large corporations should help farmers implement preventive measures, offer insurance, and adopt new technologies to mitigate the impact of adverse weather. We also need to focus on the most vulnerable populations. Every year during heat waves, we hear about people dying on the streets in India. These are the most disadvantaged individuals. Not only do they lack air conditioning, but they also don't have access to electricity or toilets. It's hard to imagine, but over 1 billion people worldwide still don't have toilets. As we work to reduce carbon emissions, we must also keep these people in mind. Another important step is integrating climate change into policy decisions. China is already doing well in this regard. Why are so many Chinese entrepreneurs paying attention to this issue? Don't think this book has nothing to do with your life. It's highly relevant. Once climate change becomes part of national policy, all government initiatives will align with this direction, and your industry will inevitably be affected to some degree. So incorporating climate change into government decision-making is crucial. Cities also need to be prepared. For urban areas, one of the biggest challenges is ensuring a reliable supply of drinking water. We also need to find ways to maintain our natural ecosystems. Bill Gates also talks about mangroves, emphasizing that instead of building flood barriers, planting mangroves can be a more effective solution. Mangroves not only have an excellent ability to reduce carbon emissions, but also play a key role in mitigating natural disasters. In the past, we converted many wetlands into farmland, which decreased the city's water retention capacity and ability to improve air quality. This chapter emphasizes that we must adapt to a warming world. In the final chapter, Gates specifically discusses the role of government. What can governments do in this process? First, they can fill the investment gap. Technologies like carbon capture, high-energy storage batteries, or converting electricity into hydrogen for storage may not be profitable in the short term. A private company might not be able to sustain such research, so governments need to step in and fill the investment gap. Second, governments can create a fair playing field. They need to ensure that various innovators have a chance for their ideas to be applied without imposing excessive barriers that prevent new technologies from being recognized. The government can use its purchasing power to encourage this. When governments procure goods, they should prioritize materials that are more environmentally friendly and technologies that emit less carbon, using their purchasing power to guide the market. Third, governments should dismantle non-market barriers. Unnecessary barriers that lead to monopolies can hinder technological progress. Fourth, governments must keep pace with the times and adjust policies as necessary, especially with the growing urgency of reducing carbon emissions. Fifth, governments need to plan for a just transition. This is crucial because reducing carbon emissions will inevitably lead to job losses. For instance, in Detroit, car manufacturers that used to produce gasoline-powered cars may see a drastic drop in demand as the industry shifts to electric vehicles. As a result, many workers could lose their jobs. Electric vehicle production processes require fewer workers, so what happens to those who are unemployed? Governments need to consider these issues and provide training, new opportunities, or welfare policies to support people affected by the transition. Sixth, governments must take the lead. They have the power and resources to drive change. Seventh, they should integrate technology, policy, and the market to work together. These 7 recommendations are the result of Bill Gates' numerous discussions with governments around the world. So what can we as ordinary people do? First, we need to start caring about this issue. In the past, terms like carbon footprint, carbon emissions, and carbon credits might have sounded strange, and we didn't know how to quantify them. We only understood money, not carbon credits. But now, we need to begin caring about these things. If consumers start paying attention to the carbon emissions of a house, a car, or even a piece of clothing, manufacturers will start considering this too. Your concern can lead to a real reduction in carbon emissions. Second, save energy and use green electricity. We need to learn how to conserve energy. It's not just about saving money, although it helps, but about preserving the Earth's resources. There's an old Chinese saying, it's not about saving wealth, it's about saving fortune. You can think of it as preserving the blessings of this earth by giving it more opportunities. Third, reduce your household carbon emissions. Can you find ways to cut down on your household's carbon footprint? Maybe keep your air conditioning a little less cool. After all, blasting the AC can even lead to colds, which cost you more in medical expenses. And what about reducing food waste? It might feel satisfying to toss leftovers, but as food decomposes, it releases carbon emissions. Fourth, consider switching to an electric vehicle. You don't need to immediately ditch your current car, but when the time comes to replace it, you might want to think about going electric. Electric vehicles today are quieter and more comfortable than ever. And then there's the suggestion to eat less beef, which is something Bill Gates specifically mentions in the book. Replacing beef with fish or chicken can drastically reduce carbon emissions. Finally, be an early adopter. Many people don't realize the impact they can have. What does it mean to be an early adopter? When a new technology or product comes out, its biggest challenge is often finding users. If everyone hesitates, questioning safety or price, the product might fail because no one is using it. But if we're willing to try new things, even if they're a bit more expensive at first, we can support the development of these new technologies. To wrap up, let's end with a quote from Bill Gates' book. I'm an optimist because I know the power of technology and I know the power of people. I'm inspired by the passion I see around climate change, especially from young people. If we stay focused on the big goal of zero emissions and make serious plans to achieve it, we can avoid a climate disaster. We can keep the planet livable for everyone, help billions of poor people lead better lives, and preserve this planet for future generations.